You have to listen to this, the University of the Airwaves. Tonight, dealing with historic anniversaries, breaking news stories, and in-depth analysis of what's going on in the news this week. It's the mother of all talk shows. First, before we go anywhere else, let's go to the story that's breaking from City Airport, near my old parliamentary constituency, which has been evacuated and closed after a quote-unquote chemical incident, and reports of passengers feeling unwell. 26 of them apparently already treated for such symptoms. One friend of the show who was there at the time the all hell broke loose is Fergus Linehan, and he's on the line now. Fergus, thanks a lot for joining us. You're safe and well now, I hope.
Yeah, we're fine.
Tell us how it was. What happened?
Well, we were just, for those who know London City, we're just coming up the stairs towards the departure lounge there where you do your boarding security, and suddenly a lot of people started coughing, and you could taste something in your mouth or feel something at the back of your throat, almost like an aerosol can or something like that. And then the alarm went off and said there's a fire in the airport. And one staff member talked about somebody spraying something, but I don't know if there was anything to that. And then we were all evacuated out into the car park. And then a lot of paramedics arrived and started just checking people's blood pressure and whatever. Anyone who had symptoms who wasn't feeling well or was coughing. And a lot of fire brigades arrived. And then we were all put out into the car park. And then we were just left there for a while. But everyone was quite calm. But clearly it was very strange, because obviously sometimes you know, kind of someone left a bag somewhere or something, but I've never experienced that thing where you could actually taste something in the air. It was quite scary. And you did yourself taste it? Yeah, you could. I mean, if you were in that area, just as I say, for those who know the airport, where you put your boarding card in just before security, it seemed to be around that area and coming up the stairs there. You could, no doubt, you could. It was pretty pungent. And could you see anything? Was there a cloud of anything? No, there was no cloud of anything at all. And I'd say it was kind of, I think people just thought, it was almost like just people having a catch in their throat. Mm. And how many people? Was it mass coughing? No. Well, I mean, I suppose there was sort of 20 or 30 people around, and it was only for a moment. And it was literally kind of, we just sort of noticed that suddenly people coughing, as I say, like as if you had a sort of a dry cough, and then the alarm went off, and it did seem to be coming from the bottom of the stairs on the way up to departures there. Because then we were before security, just before security at departures boarding pass area. Yeah. And from what you say, the authorities there seem to have handled it pretty well, pretty efficiently, and the passengers remained pretty calm. Passengers were great. Yeah, passengers were great. I mean, luckily it wasn't pouring rain or anything outside, but everyone seemed to be, very calm about it. It's a strange one, as I say, because normally if it's a fire or whatever else, you're just getting as far away, but then they obviously had to go and talk to people and say, is anyone feeling sick? So that was kind of going on for a while. So it was kind of unlike, it wasn't like when the bomb squad or anything arrives. It was a very, very strange experience. It sounds a strange experience, to say the least, and I'm glad that you and yours have emerged from it. And 26 people have been treated. Does that include the people you saw, getting their blood pressure taken and so on? I presume so. I honestly don't know. I mean, I just hope it was nothing. I hope it was some sort of cleaning stuff or something that had gone awry. I hope everyone's okay. Mm-hmm. Well, look, Fergus, I'm really grateful to you for calling in and giving us the frontline report that you have. I appreciate it. It wasn't a great phone line, but it was a great report. You've got a future in this game. Now, let me see. The London Fire Brigade said the incident is now over. I can't actually read the rest of that. The airport has been declared safe. So people can come and go now, Edward, back to the airport. Still no news as to what the so-called suspected chemical leak was. But of course, if that news breaks, we'll definitely bring it to you
just as soon as we have it. So the London Fire Brigade say the incident at City Airport is now over and the airport has been declared safe. So if you're headed there, then have no fear. Keep calm and carry on, which, according to our caller there, is exactly what people did. And that's the only way to face these kind of incidents. We don't know, of course, what the cause of this incident was, whether it was accidental, industrial, criminal stroke terrorist. We've no idea at this point. But no one seems to have suffered serious harm, and the incident is over and the airport is safe. So that story, I have no doubt, will run throughout the next 3 hours, but we've got much, much more on the stocks also. Now, the fake Sheikh and I go back a long way. I managed to secure an emergency debate in the House of Commons almost 20 years ago, in which I denounced his methodology of creating crimes, of commissioning crimes, in order to entrap people, which then lost them their careers, sometimes their marriages, sometimes their health. In that debate, it's worth looking back, in that debate I focused on several cases, but one of them was, and the London Fire Brigade is of course in the news this very hour, I focused on the London's burning actor John Alford, who was a young and promising actor in that television series, whose life, not just his career, whose life was trashed, ruined by just such an entrapment by the fake Sheikh. The methodology in subsequent years became more and more famous. And one night I was confronted by him myself. He had posed as an Indian businessman, a Muslim businessman, who for many weeks had been seeking a meeting with me to discuss how he could financially assist my various political causes. I smelt a rat from the beginning, and the intermediary, a man called Muhammad Ali, who was then and now, I think, the proprietor of the Islam channel, was pestering me for a meeting with this Indian businessman. He told me that this Indian businessman was exceedingly rich and wanted to give some of it to me. I told him that I was very suspicious because, in my experience, rich people don't come after you to give you money. It's usually the other way around. But finally, I agreed to meet him. The size of the rat that I was smelling grew ever larger. First of all, he was not there actually to receive me, even though I couldn't get there till after my Talk Sports show, which I then did on Friday and Saturday nights. So I didn't get to the hotel, and to the Dorchester Hotel, until around 10:30 in the evening. He wasn't there to receive me, which is not a very Islamic etiquette way of doing business. And so I was sat at the restaurant table waiting for him to appear. When he did appear, several things immediately struck me as strange. First of all, he was wearing rather a lot of jewellery, and deeply devout Sunni Muslims, which is what he was passing himself off as, don't wear jewellery. When he embraced me, I distinctly smelt commercial aftershave, male perfume, which a very religious Sunni Muslim would not wear because, well, there's almost always alcohol in it. He had absolutely no interest in whether anything on the menu had alcohol in it, especially the dessert. which very often does have either alcohol or pig products in it, gelatine principally. He had no interest in any of those things. So he was already a pretty big rat sitting in front of me from my point of view. He then started to try and commission crimes. He said that he wanted to give me very substantial donations to my then political party, Respect. I told him that that was illegal, and rightly so, and that I was one of those who had campaigned to make it illegal for foreign funders to finance British politics. So he said, well, I can find a British person to give this money to, and that British person can give the money to you. I told him that would be doubly illegal, and moreover would constitute a conspiracy to break the law, and everyone involved would go to prison. So it was illegal. It was right that it was illegal. I had fought for it to be illegal, and I was not interested in such illegality. He finally gave up that track and began to try to entrap me in anti-Semitic remarks. Because I have not a scintilla of hatred or animus towards Jewish people, and because anti-Semitism is a form of racism, and I have spent my entire life fighting racism, was clearly not going to follow him down that road. He began to talk about Jewish control of the British media, and he rattled off a list of names of those big owners of the British media who he claimed were Jews, some of them quite surprising in the circumstances. I told them, he was joined by a Sri Lankan gentleman by the name of Fernandez, who was his right-hand man, that, number one, none of the people you've just mentioned are Jews. Number two, if they were Jews, that would be the best thing about them. In some cases, the only good thing about them. Thirdly, it's not true that Jewish people control the British media. At that time, Jewish people controlled none of the British media, which is almost the case also today. This was 10 years ago. So I knew by then that I was dealing with a very big rat. And when I got up to leave, and he asked me to pose for a picture with his bodyguard, whom he said was a big fan of mine, when the bodyguard opened his mouth and showed a mouthful of gold teeth, I then knew who I'd been dealing with, what the name of the rat was. Because I had read Andrew Marr's book, in which he described the same bodyguard and the same mouthful of gold teeth. So when I got outside, I knew that it was the fake sheikh. To cut a long story short, I was then injuncted from publishing the pictures that you have now all seen of the fake sheikh, an injunction that was overturned in the High Court the next day. And I went on Channel 4 News with the radio presenter Nick Ferrari, and I presented the picture of the fake sheikh. I then wrote to everyone from the Queen downwards, enclosing these pictures and saying, look out for this big rat. Some of them obviously didn't open my email, because at least 2 members of the royal family were subsequently stung by him. So we're going to discuss tonight what this all means. His conviction, Mazhar Mahmood's conviction, his imprisonment today. We're going to discuss what that means for journalism. So let me lay my cards on the table. I support investigative journalism. There is a case for subterfuge in journalism. The Daily Telegraph's subterfuge in putting somebody in to the finance office of the House of Commons and producing the data which became the MP's expenses scandal was one of the finest pieces of journalism in modern times. It's the difference between trawling and angling we're talking about here. If crimes are being committed, it's absolutely justified for journalists to employ subterfuge to bring those crimes into the open and those criminals to book. What cannot be countenanced is journalists commissioning crimes, journalists setting up crimes. And that's what Mazhar Mahmood, the fake sheikh, had been doing. Not just in the Tulisa case, but as subsequent court developments may well show, in many, many other cases too. I have a simple demand. I demand that the recording of my night with the fake sheikh be published. In fact, wouldn't it be a good idea if we could play it here on Talk Radio? That would have a perfect symmetry, because that would show how venal he was and how I utterly resisted every one of his invitations to say and do wrong things. That's all I've ever asked for, actually, and I'm asking for it still. We'll be talking to John Cooper, Queen's Counsel, a criminal barrister, that is to say, a barrister dealing in criminal affairs rather than a barrister who is a criminal, because John Cooper, QC, is no criminal, but he's definitely a very fine barrister. And he'll be talking with me in a moment or two about what all this means for not the fake sheikh, he's history now, but for journalism and the rights and obligations of journalists involved in this kind of thing. Now, at 9:15 this morning, we remembered what happened 50 years ago. And I was 12 years old, in school, myself, when it happened, when 116 children were killed in an instant in the South Wales mining valley of Aberfan, when a coal slag heap moved and crushed the school in which they were sitting and killed, I think, 24 or 26 adults also. 144 people were killed in an instant in a small village of Aberfan in the South Wales Valley. And I remembered it, both because I lived through it, but also because of my long association with the mining communities in South Wales. And I hope that you remembered it too. We're talking also about the US election as it moves into its final phase. I think all the debates have now been held, if debates you can call them. Nothing like the debate I had in New York City with the late Christopher Hitchens. If you want a debate, a grapple in the apple, look that one up on YouTube. That's what you call a debate. These two jokers, Clinton and Trump, ain't debaters, that's for sure. We'll be talking to Professor Inderjeet Parmar, a very, very great expert, professor of international politics at City University, about that. And we'll be talking about the very vexed issue of the child sex abuse inquiry. The more I read about this, the more shocking it is. Last week, you'll recall, I read extensively from a very fine piece of investigative reporting by the Times newspaper, and they have been in the lead, actually, on this story. And the Times gave us chapter and verse. It looked shocking and surprising to some, and a little unbelievable even to some. But in the week since I read out that Times investigation here on Talk Radio, everyone now knows that not only was the information in the Times correct, but that the Prime Minister herself knew about it. And that's significant because the Prime Minister, who was the Home Secretary at the time, claimed to know nothing about the reasons why the previous head of the inquiry, had departed for New Zealand. Sorry, Edward, New Zealand doesn't come out well in this particular story. Edward's my wonderful producer through the glass, who's as New Zealand as the Kiwi itself, and I know that it hurts him. But the behaviour, the rhetoric, the things that this woman said should have resulted in her instant dismissal. I doubt if you're allowed to talk that way in New Zealand, but you certainly ain't when you're in the corridors of power as a judge in the British judicial system. Now, why this is significant is the age-old story. You might call it the Watergate question. What did you know and when did you know it? What did Theresa May know about the conduct of the inquiry under that woman? When did she know it? And what did she do about it? We're not yet in possession of all these facts, but we're going to have to be. And proper parliamentary scrutiny. Amber Rudd is now the Home Secretary. She tried to play a straight bat in the House of Commons this week. If I may say so, she didn't do a very good job. The opposition are closing in on this story because it might just be Theresa May's first big scandal. So, that's all coming up over the course of the next 2.5 hours, plus any breaking news about the events at City Airport. We'll talk about nightmares. You are the biggest nightmare, Mr. Donald Trump. But first up, we're talking about the fake Sheikh Mazhar Mahmood, who was jailed today for 15 months, found guilty a week or two ago of tampering with evidence in the Tulisa trial. I have a long history with him, part of which I adumbrated in my opening remarks, and I think they were livecast on my Facebook page. And as I said, we have John Cooper, Queen's Counsel, leading criminal and human rights barrister, who's graciously agreed to join us this evening. John Cooper, thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, George. Hardly gracefully. I'm honoured to be invited.
No, thank you so much. It's not often we get to talk to QCs without having to pay a lot of money for it. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Indeed.
Pleasure.
Now, John, tell us your view on the fake Sheikh. Was his conviction finally inevitable, do you think? And what does the judgment mean for investigative journalism hereafter?
I think the evidence against him was overwhelming. I knew well the barrister who defended Tulisa. He was from my own chambers, so I had a particularly intimate knowledge of the development of that case. And the evidence was overwhelming against him. Maybe I should explain to your listeners, George, the sentencing guidelines so they can get a handle on what 15 months means. Well, this was, as you just rightly said, conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Now, in fact, the maximum penalty is actually life imprisonment, so it ranges from life imprisonment to a fine, so that's a pretty broad band to be dealing it with. And what the courts take into account when they sentence are really three things. First of all, the length of time of the deception. Secondly, the nature of the deception. And thirdly, the consequences of the deception. So length of time, nature, and consequences. Now, in the case as far as Mazhar Mahmood's concerned, he was only being charged, indicted and convicted on one particular set of instances, the Tulisa matter, and so that's why it's 15 months, rather than, in some cases, you get matters of years. For instance, there was a case recently where a man committed benefit fraud, hid it, and tried to attempt the course of justice over a period of years, and got 3 years. Someone else, for instance, tried to hide an industrial accident and gave a false account of what happened to the court. He also got 3 years. So it really depends upon the consequences and the circumstances. And 15 years, if it had asked me beforehand, I would probably have said 2 years. So it's a little lower, I think, than I would have anticipated.
Now, he the consequences would have been the complete professional destruction of the victim, in this case, Tulisa. She would have been charged by the police and convicted by the police, might herself have gone to prison and become professionally completely unemployable. So I myself have no view on whether 15 months is light or not as a punishment, because in fact it brings about the end now of Mazhar Mahmood's professional career. He's been sacked.
Yes.
He'll never work in Fleet Street again. No one would touch him with a barge pole, and of course he'll have to be very careful in prison, because he's probably not all that popular in the penal colony.
George, I think, George, you're right. In fact, I think it's he or his representatives have already made that observation. I think his barrister made that observation during his mitigation in court, that he actually feared for his own safety in the prison system. And given the lack of funding in the prison system of late, and the complaints being made by prison officers about difficulty in preventing violence, then I think it's even more a problem for anyone going to prison who thinks that they are vulnerable.
Indeed. Is there any possibility of criminal proceedings in other cases? Leave the civil matters aside for a minute. Is there any possibility of criminal proceedings, or are they all now spent in terms of statutes of limitations?
No, there's no statute of limitation when it comes to criminal proceedings, as we know, for instance, from the appalling historic sex cases that are coming through the books as far as the courts are concerned. There's no sell-by date for prosecuting someone, is the best way of putting it, and people have been prosecuted, in fact, in the past for offences going back 30-odd years. It's very much a matter of what the Crown Prosecution consider the evidence is. There are two criteria that the Crown Prosecution Service will consider. One, is there a reasonable prospect of success? And that means, is there a 50-50 chance of success of conviction in the court? And two, is it in the public interest? It might be considered that it certainly is in the public interest. And as far as the evidence is concerned, well, I'm not privy to that. But the prosecution, I would have thought, from my experience, both as a prosecutor and defender, I think the prosecutor will be looking into this to see whether there are other cases which could be brought against him. It may not be the end of the book yet.
No, I think so, because the methodology, the modus operandi in the Tulisa case was replicated maybe hundreds of times. Yes. Seducing someone into your circle and then commissioning a crime which you ask them to carry out.
I can absolutely see now the weekend and midnight all being burned by a number of defence lawyers this weekend, looking at their old cases and their old clients who went down as a result of Mr. Mahmood's evidence, and carefully considering whether there were wrongful convictions. That's the other aspect to consider, you see. There may well be people, I don't know, there may well be people still in prison at the moment who are serving sentences who may be considering appeals now based on this man's input into their case.
Now, what does it all mean for the future for journalism? I don't know if you heard my talk-up, John, but I made the dichotomy of trawling and angling. If you are sure that there is criminal conduct taking place, then subterfuge is perfectly justifiable and in the public interest for a journalist to employ where there is prima facie evidence of criminal conduct going on. What is not permitted, surely, is for a journalist to just look around who's in the B list or C list of celebrities this week, this year, and invite them to the Dorchester for drinks and see if you can't persuade them to commit a crime.
I think a number of things you touch on there, George, perfectly correctly. And I think the first thing I think we need to say here is that there's a lot of very competent investigative journalists of integrity that do an extremely important job in society, and that I think we should remember that just because Mazza Mahmood has disgraced their calling by this conviction, there are others that do a very good job, and you and I could perhaps with your listeners discuss many great examples of investigative journalism, ranging from the thalidomide exposure to many others that I know you've been involved in helping to expose yourself.
I mentioned the great Daily Telegraph scoop of the MP's expenses. There was hundreds, maybe thousands, of examples of malfeasance in public office, which the Telegraph, by subterfuge, got hold of and published. And the miscreants, not enough of them, were damned.
I think the important thing here is discretion. I mean, you can use the analogy with the police as well. The police are entitled, as a matter of law, where they feel an offence is being committed or offences are being committed, to set up sting operations, as long as they don't encourage an offence which wouldn't otherwise be committed, but simply get themselves involved with trapping known criminals or people involved with criminal activity. That is a perfectly proper way. There's a case called texiera in the law. Perfectly proper way to achieve proper convictions. The same and the similar thing will apply, for instance, to investigative journalists. It's all a matter, George, as we all know, in whatever job you do, whether it be a lawyer, whether it be a journalist, whether it be a politician, what you will, of exercising proper judgment and proper discretion.
Okay, it's been terrific talking to you, John, not just because it didn't cost me, but because you're a very wise, erudite, sharp man, leading criminal and human rights barrister, John Cooper, QC. Of course, you can tweet me, as Scouser Lar has, disgusted that the bigoted Tories filibustered the Alan Turing bill today. Somebody tell them it's 2016. This is an interesting story. It was a private member's bill introduced by the SNP MP, John Nicholson. Now, I'm no fan of the SNP, as regular listeners will know, nor actually of John Nicholson MP, with whom I travelled in the Middle East during the first Gulf War 26 years ago. But don't worry, John, my lips are sealed. But I do take my hat off for the effort that he made today, which was basically to apply generally that which it is now by common acclaim is the case with Alan Turing. Alan Turing was mainly responsible, certainly largely responsible, for the Enigma program, which cracked the codes of the Nazi war machine and helped to turn the course of the Second World War. Alan Turing was, as in those days he had to be, secretly a gay man. He was, after the war, convicted and ordered to be chemically castrated, as well as incarcerated, and he met a very miserable, lamentable end. It was a shameful episode in our national history. It has been recognised as such, but only in the case of Alan Turing. The SNP private members' bill sought to make it a general law that people convicted of crimes which are no longer regarded as crimes should be posthumously pardoned. You would have thought that nobody in their right mind, certainly nobody with a heart, would object. But the Tories in Parliament today did object. Indeed, some of them jeered, some of them mocked, and all of them filibustered, talked out the measure, making its chance of reaching the statute book very, very slim. Shame on them, and thanks, Scouser Lar, for bringing it to our attention this evening. Now, in my earlier remarks, I talked about the day at 9:15 this morning, 50 years ago, when 116 children in a school were killed in an instant as a coal slag heap slipped moved and crushed their school and them, their desks and chairs. It's almost an inconceivable level of tragedy. 144 people lost their lives, and as I said, I have a very long history, 40 years nearly, of association with the mining communities, and in particular of the South Wales mining community, and that's why I identified with today's moment of silence even more acutely than perhaps some others did. Ray is there in the valleys, in Pontypridd, and he wants to talk about this subject. Ray, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, George. My heart goes out on this very sad day to all the people of Aberfan. I live approximately 7 miles from Aberfan.
And were you there at the time? Were you 7 miles away at the time?
No, I wasn't, George. We had moved to Hay-on-Wye at the time. I was about 16 at the time. I live directly under one of these slag heaps that's still there, after Aberfan.
Wow.
And in 1990, George, it rained all the week, terrible rain. And the police came round early in the morning to put leaflets in to say we may have to move you out of your village to a leisure centre floor because the tip was sliding towards the village.
Wow.
We got a petition up, George. Kim Owls came to the village. He stood on the hill by the school, poignantly, and he said this tip has got to go. And it's still there today, George.
My goodness. Why? Why can't they remove it?
They can. It's a money thing, I think, George. They've done over $1.5 million remedial work twice on this tip. 2 years ago, they done over £1 million putting in new drains and that.
Goodness me, how much would it cost to move it? Can't be much more than that, surely.
And we had to get on to our AM, Christine Chapman, keep on to her, to get the money released from the Assembly to do this remedial work. It took ages for it to be forthcoming.
Unbelievable.
You know what I mean, George?
And that's remedial work. That doesn't mean that the tragedy couldn't happen again.
Yes, but do they learn nothing from history, only how to repeat it, George? You would think that all tips, and I mean all, in Great Britain, that were threatening people or houses or property, people more especially, would have been moved after Aberfan and people wouldn't be in this situation.
Unbelievable.
You know, I mean, I despair.
I remember the day. I mean, I was 12, so you were what? You were 16.
I was 16, George.
I remember it. I remember in those days, media wasn't what it is now, of course.
No.
There was no rolling 24/7 news coverage and so on. But I remember the extraordinariness of the disaster, don't you?
I do, George. And to make matters worse, George, the way they treated those people, that George Thomas, the Welsh minister at the time, he took money out of the fund that had been raised worldwide to remove the slag heap from there.
Unbelievable. And when that should have gone to the victims' families.
But the Assembly have paid that money back on interest now because it went bust, that fund. And it was for the upkeep of them little children's graves.
Unbelievable.
In Aberfan, and he took the money out of that fund to remove the tip. What
was the atmosphere in the valleys this morning? It was
somber, George. It was somber.
Pretty somber, yeah.
I mean, it's a tight-knit community here, you know.
Of course.
And I mean, you know what happened since the pit closed. It's Desolation Row here all over, you know what I mean?
I do indeed.
I mean, these valleys have been left to rot over the years. I mean, even when we were rich, from 2008 from 1998 to 2008, we were pretty rich, weren't we?
Yep.
The valleys just crumbled. They're crumbling now. They were crumbling then. It don't matter whether we rich or poor. We just left, you know, George. Anyway, thank you, George, for listening.
Thank you. A very, very sombre call from Ray in Pontypridd, and he's not wrong. let's see if we can. Yes, we can. Let's talk to Henry. Now, one of my many causes is saving Tin Pan Alley, London's Tin Pan Alley in Denmark Street in Soho. Henry's been fighting to save music on Denmark Street, and he's called up the show, and I'm glad he has. Henry, welcome.
Very nice to talk to you, George. A pleasure, and thank you for your Twitter support for our campaign.
Tell me, not me because I know, but tell the listeners, what's happening to Denmark Street?
Well, there's a phrase, when people come to cities, and we've tried to tell Channel 4 this, so I'm so glad that you've had us on. You talk about the process of erosion through gradualness. So some people don't see change because you walk past the street every day and maybe one shop closes or one business disappears. But people who live outside London are amazed that the only street of music of its kind left in the world is now under threat of development. And we've got a council, Camden Council, and the GLA, who've tried to help us to maintain some of the music business in the street, who are also utterly in denial of what's happened. George, in the past 2 years, 15 long-standing music-based businesses have vacated from Denmark Street because of the developments of Crossrail, which, of course, nobody could have missed, because it's the largest singular development in any major city, I would say, in Europe. And we came along, George, because most people weren't aware this was going to happen. Unless you happen to be looking at Camden's planning website to find out which bits of London are going to change next, nobody is going to know apart from the people in the immediate vicinity who get something through their letterbox. The print media up until 3 years ago had not covered this, and we wanted to raise consciousness and awareness about just how property developers had got this kind of entitled opinion that they could insinuate a utopian vision upon London to the detriment of music. We've seen 5 music venues go. We've seen a recording studio close. We've seen a street with a history of guitar making and luthiers, as they're called, since the times of Casanova, who actually lived in the street, would you believe, for 2 years at number 28.
Well, Soho's always been that kind of area.
So it's always had a bit of that. So, there's our thread back and our thread forward. But we decided we would try and fight this and see if we could affect some positivity in amongst us. And it's been a very difficult uphill struggle, but we have made some positive gains. On March 22nd, we managed to get English Heritage and Historic England to Grade 2 star list number 6 and 7 Denmark Street, which were built originally in 1688. They are the oldest surviving commercial Georgian properties left in London. They survived the Blitz, and they survived the demolition that was around in the 60s when they nearly tried to pull Denmark Street this time when they built Centrepoint.
Yes, it was narrowly saved then,
No, it was. Well, you could see it. What they did at the end of Denmark Street was, of course, they demolished all of that, and that was on the end of this great historic area that was then, of course, known as Gin Lanes, and and had come from that period in history.
Centrepoint, which became utterly empty and derelict.
Yes, in a way, George, I'm very interested in your take on this, but isn't it interesting how Centrepoint really is a metaphor for what's now happened over the past few years in all our major cities? It was a buy-to-leave empty property asset, which is now somehow seen to be legitimized by the architectural community, who have colluded with property developers and politicians to create these pieces of asset value to people who are never ever going to live in them. And, our concern was that even above Denmark Street, they were going to create buy-to-leave luxury penthouses at, between £2 and £3 million and call them music apartments.
Music apartments, my God.
And music hotels, would you believe?
Oh, dear. So, look, I've only got a minute left. Tell me how people can learn more about your campaign and how they can help it.
Well, what we're doing, George, is we're making a film to see what's been lost in Denmark Street, and it's being crowdfunded through Fundee, PHUNDEE.com. Just look for the image of Tin Pan Alley Tales. We're going to get key people who've lived and worked in the street, and we're going to show what's been lost to development and explain what a great music street this was and why we want to keep it. So thank you for letting me.
Henry, you're a gentleman, and more power to your plucking, because I want to help save what we can of Denmark Street. This is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows on Talk Radio. This show is nothing without you. I could talk for 3 hours. You already know that. But it's important that I listen also, and that it's important that you hear me and others arguing, agreeing, vehemently, violently disagreeing, whatever. I'm ready to face it all, and I'm sure you are too. Now, lots of SMS and tweets, an anonymous SMS. I read it because it's a good one. The person says, even though I am poor and struggle to get by, I would rather be me than Donald Trump. I am grateful to him for helping me appreciate what is important in life by personifying all that is morally bankrupt. That's absolutely accurate, but I'm bound to tell you, you could have texted exactly the same thing about Hillary Clinton. Can there ever have been an election in which you wanted less, one of them, to win? And Kevin SMSs, did you hear the Roy Greenslade interview on Radio 4 News, where he was going to sack the fake sheikh, but he resigned before he could take action? And Peter says, Mr. Galloway, please, do you think this shameful government will ever allow the freedom of Mr. Assange from his forced asylum in the Ecuador embassy? Peter, that is in Glasgow. I might turn to that later, Peter, because it is an important issue, and we might even get Mr. Assange back on the show some week. He's already been on it, of course, but it's an issue in which I take a very close interest. Now, I'm turning now to a guest that has also been on before, and who profoundly affected me with the sincerity, the power of the case that he was arguing. He is of the Shirley Oaks Survivors Association. Indeed, he is their spokesperson, and he's mightily unhappy about the course of the CSA inquiry. And the last time we spoke to him, he talked about a UDI, a unilateral declaration of independence from the whole thing, withdrawing cooperation with it. Let's see where he stands now. Raymond Stevenson, welcome back.
How are you doing, George?
I'm good. Tell us how you're doing. Tell us what you think about the recent revelations, the development of the inquiry, and where you stand on it now.
We most probably stand even further back than we did 2 years ago when it was announced, and we agreed to be part of the investigation because we thought that we could bring something to the table. As we said before, we've been carrying out our own investigations. So it was really, from our point of view, a presentation we were going to make. And we wanted 60 survivors to speak and tell about their experiences, but also for us to explain through our report the interwoven connections that took place in Lambeth that allowed the abuse to take place. So we started off distrusting this inquiry, and we pointed out reasons very early on. We felt the Home Office, who were liable for many of the children's homes in the 50s, right up until the 70s, as a sponsor, that they should allow all of us to know their liability, and also to convince us there would be a firewall between the inquiry and the Home Office. Clearly, by what's come out now and by what Justice Goddard has identified, is that firewall is just
made of paper.
Yeah, it is, and it's sad to say we predicted it, but this is what's happening, and in a way that was what inspired us to do our own investigation, because we didn't trust the system, and now it's breaking down right in front of our eyes. It's we're disturbed.
Is it possible for you to tell us something of what you've been investigating and what you've found to date?
We've just passed on a report. It's 200 pages. and it looks into the failings in Lambeth, and we've identified 60 paedophiles that worked in Lambeth.
60.
60, from 1948 right up until 1996.
Working in the children's services area.
Working in children's homes, working in social services, housing. Some of them were connected to the priesthood, visiting the children, and there is a connection between all of them, even across the generations. And it was almost as if people were inviting people there. And as people got older, they invited other like-minded paedophiles, and they were protecting their domain, an area which they absolutely controlled, which was through Lambeth Council. So we've identified that. We know what took place. We looked at their reports that they produced themselves, and we unpicked the reports and established that these reports were deliberately narrow remits and carried out by people who may not have had a vested interest in getting to the truth. And the truth is, the police themselves identified 50 paedophiles, which we've recently discovered in a document. So they were on the case, but they only convicted 3. And we wanted to know why. And it clearly wasn't because people didn't come forward, because we have 680 people who are part of the Shirley Oak survivors, 400 who we've interviewed, and many of them who made complaints. So it's clear that something untoward has gone on, and it was top down rather than bottom up. And there were senior police officers and council officers who conspired not to let the truth come out, which we've revealed. So we were hoping this national inquiry, we could feed into that and explain exactly how a group of, we call them a virus of paedophiles, can absolutely take over an institute, control the movement of children, and abuse them at will. And we felt it was important for people to learn and know exactly how this took place and how the mindset of these people work. And in a way, if this was done 20 years ago, we would have predicted what would have taken place on the internet. So we're trying to be ahead of the game, and we're trying to show exactly how these people operated. But in a way, it feels like that this inquiry, which we wanted to feed into, is being contrived in such a way that we can't take part. And that's what's worrying us. Actually, it's since the resignations, we're feeling as if there is a deliberate attempt to make it almost impossible for us to be part of this.
Is it possible, Raymond, that there's a deliberate attempt being made to prepare public opinion for saying, look, this is just not worth going on with, it's too difficult to go on with?
Absolutely, that's a narrative that almost started from day one when it was announced. There were movements afoot to try to discredit this. So we know that, and we know the public are being brainwashed into thinking that this inquiry shouldn't happen. Let me make it very clear, even if we pull out, we believe this inquiry for other people has to happen. And it has to happen in the way that it's set out, because it was originally set out to serve all those areas of concern. So I can feel it being narrowed down in the language of Alex J. When she talks about seminars, we can move to seminars and thematic ideas, which are all social services theories of the 70s, which means they can sit round the table cross-legged and discuss it and theorize, but not investigate and really get underneath the skirt boards of what has been going on and what is our inheritance now. This country is a great country and has great people, but we've inherited this disease at the top and in these institutes where everything is covered up, nothing can come out. Are we too ignorant to learn the truth? There has been a cover-up, really, and it's not for people to put it in that area of conspiracy. There has been a cover-up.
Well, it's self-evidently there has been. Of course, the areas that the inquiry was to look at was broken up institutionally, wasn't it? It was church, it was social services, children's homes, it was the military, etc. But now the new leadership, the fourth leadership, is putting, first of all, a finishing date of 2020, so just over 3 years, and beginning to talk about narrowing the scope or the spectrum of the institutions that are going to be investigated. That doesn't exactly fill you with confidence, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it kind of, for us, it sounds predictable. The language sounds predictable. It sounds like a dumbing down of the inquiry. And yes, to keep those headlines to please everyone, but to merge them together and to theorise more than investigate, which, if you did that with Lambeth, we wouldn't have discovered the amount of paedophiles and the connections and where they came from and who they abused before. You know, you just go to accepting this happened. We want to know how. We wanted to know how, who was involved, why we were moved from home to home, why one of my friends was abused in one house and I was moved and beaten in that house. And we've now tracked the movement of staff so we can see exactly how it developed and how they became confident and how more people were invited to Lambeth.
Well, that's a very important point that you make. If you think about it, it's not rocket science, but it's taken people a long time to understand it. You see, a conspiracy theorist would say, why would there be all that going on in Lambeth? Well, of course, the reason is, if you get a cluster of paedophiles working in the business in Lambeth, they bring others.
Yep.
And they have to bring others because they have to cover up when they retire or move somewhere else. They have to leave the business in the hands of people who are like them, who have a vested interest in covering up for them.
Absolutely, and that becomes, there's the generational cover-up. And also there's those other people who are around them who are compromised because they're corrupt or because they've done something wrong. So we say an institute can become evil if it's dominated by evil people. So we have labelled Lambeth Council as an evil institute because those people who were in those controlling positions had an ulterior motive, and it definitely wasn't to look after the children or to serve the people in the community. So everyone is affected by these people. And in Lambeth, we've got an example, we've got a way of showing exactly how the pattern of behaviour affected every sphere of that council. So everyone can learn from it, but clearly people are trying to curtail, we believe, Lambeth and those other people who are organised, there are other groups. If you're not organised, they seem to let you through and don't allow you to become organised, won't fund you. We're lucky, we're self-funded, so if we didn't have our own funding, if we didn't have our own expertise, we'll be waiting for this inquiry, which just is falling around our feet at this moment.
What's the attitude of today's Lambeth Council towards your investigations?
I will honestly say, and everybody knows me, I try to be as honest as I can. If it wasn't for the movement of the council, and where after a year of investigating and having a unsettled relationship, we knew that if we could get to them emotionally and allow them to hear some of the stories, and we did various videos that we put online, that we knew if they were human, it would affect them. And it did affect them. And they've changed, and they've participated in this. Now, I have to say this, and we're trying to show other councils absolutely don't be afraid of those people who are survivors who want to know the truth. Embrace them, because you can learn. I hope Lambeth have learned. And we definitely sit round the table every 2 weeks, and they know that I represent my survivors, but we have a cordial relationship, and they've helped us to discover the truth, to learn about our history. So, yeah, we have to congratulate them.
Well, I congratulate you, and your organisation is very lucky that it's thrown up the kind of leadership that you have displayed. You're an excellent advocate. You may not be a QC, but you are a great advocate. Thanks for that, Raymond Stevenson of the Shirley Oaks Survivors Association. Now, I mean, tell me, you may not know anything about Lambeth. You may not know anything about the huge seam of corruption and vice which the association has uncovered. But you have an interest, because you were once yourself a child. You may very well have children or grandchildren, may very well one day have them. You have an interest in knowing whether this system, this investigation is going anywhere. So let me know if you have any faith any longer in the system getting to grips with the apparently endemic scale of child sexual abuse in Britain. In the past, and if it was happening in the past, there's not that many reasons for imagining that it wouldn't be happening now. Give me your views on that. Do you have faith in the system in terms of getting to grips with this? And you can tweet me. Fido Balks has, "This is one big organised cover-up. Who on earth is involved?" Brackets, rhetorical question. And Justin Hesford says, "Entrapment. If you're a good law-abiding citizen, you've nothing to fear." Oh dear, Justin. Oh dear. Anthony Douglas sends an email, I think. "Good evening, George. The Tories have an unelected PM and we need to stop this government and hold them to account. Please share this event. We need a general election now." Unfortunately, Anthony, I can't see what event you wanted me to share. Jane A. says, "Against many MSM, mainstream media reports, paedophiles do work together." You bet they do. Clinton Mason said, "They have infested all agencies and all the top levels and now covering up everything. The abuse inquiry is a joke." Justin Hesford, back for more. MP Khan, not sure who MP Khan is, says EU Defence Department budget of 256 billion, with eyes on the arms trade opportunities. The Ministry of Bent Police, Ian Puddock, an old mate of mine. "Where were the Met Police when the fake sheikh trashed the law for the last decade?" Well, some of the police were collaborating with them, and that was bad enough. But one suspects that money changed hands too. Sean Andalou says, "Yes, George, the last Scottish elections." I don't know what that means. It's all very obscure. Patrick Sweeney says, "Trump over Clinton." No, I'm Jill Stein myself. David Beckham for PM. People have a third option he's promoting. Dr. Jill Stein. Also, Jim Devlin says it's the perfect evidence of why the American democratic process needs a total overhaul. He's talking about the two cheeks of the same backside represented by Clinton and Trump. Alan Turing is a hero, says a texter. Remember Lord Boothby? Ronald Cray? Turing should have a statue next to Churchill. Well, he certainly was a hero. He was certainly treated shamefully. It's a mark of national shame how Turing was treated. But at least he posthumously got justice. What was blocked in Parliament today was an effort to provide justice for others in the same boat. Michelle says, "I would ask why there is an attempt to abolish misconduct in public office with no retrospective prosecution." And Anonymous says, "Oh, and Parliament isn't like that, George. You worked there. Tell us, how many child molesters in that building?" Well, I wish that I could. And if, of course, I had known of any child molesters, I promise you, you would have been the first to know about it. Now, coming up later in the programme, we'll get the latest views and analysis on the US election and reaction to this week's final presidential debate. I didn't see the debate myself, but I've seen the coverage of it. My judgment would be that just by standing up straight and being able to walk and chew gum at the same time, Trump probably held his own in the debate, at least when I sift through the liberal bias in the media against him and for Clinton. I abhor both of them. I think they are equally repulsive, repugnant. I could never vote for either of them, could never advocate that anyone should ever vote for them. I don't accept that she is the lesser of two evils. They are both evil. And I don't believe in voting for people because they are the lesser of two evils, because that only encourages more evil. Think about it. It's a matter of simple logic. If everybody is prepared to vote for the lesser of two evils, that only encourages a charge towards more and more evil. And all you have to be is marginally less evil than the other, and everyone's got to vote for you. No thanks. Especially when the Green Party candidate, Dr. Jill Stein, is easily, and I mean easily, the most impressive candidate in the race. That's a fact that anyone following closely this election can see. You just need to go on to YouTube and look her up. So we'll be talking about that with an expert from City University in the third hour. And I'm driving, or being driven most, of the way to Scotland overnight, because I must attend a funeral in Kilmarnock in the morning of my old friend, more than 60 years. He pushed me in my pram and I was with him on his deathbed. I elicited his last laugh on this earth by telling a joke that he once told. And he died just a few hours later, Willie McKelvey, the former Member of Parliament for Kilmarnock. So I'm delivering a eulogy for him at 10 o'clock in the morning, and believe it or not, the overnight sleeper was fully booked. So the only way, literally the only way to get to Kilmarnock by 10 a.m. is to drive up overnight. Let's talk to John in Glasgow on the abuse inquiry issue. John, welcome.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
I think that these abuse inquiries, the difficulty we have here is that as a nation, there are no parameters in this country as far as how far back, how wide. The scope is almost endless as a nation. The United Kingdom isn't the only country that has abusers, paedophiles. We're not the only country that's awash with these things. But when you look at internationally, other countries do not seem to be stuck in the same quagmire that we are. This isn't to diminish whatever has happened to anybody, but there are no statutes of limitations on very many things in this country. Other countries do not have statute of limitations for capital crimes, but there are on almost anything else. And what that leads to is that in this country, there's inquiries in so many things, and the result at the end of the day is that the people who are supposed to benefit from these inquiries remain dissatisfied.
Well, I mean, the thing is, John, there are several purposes to inquiries and to the case for not just turning the page and forgetting these things. First of all, for a lot of people, closure is important, and some sense that their abuser had some measure of justice dealt to them, even if posthumously, is a natural human feeling. But and I speak as someone who once was a victim of such abuse. But a more important, and therefore I think I'm entitled to say a more important issue is getting to grips with cover-ups. Because if you can cover up this kind of thing, what are you not covering up? What have you not covered up? And for me, that's an even bigger issue. You see, if, as in my case, an officer in the Army Cadet Force, the school janitor, was sexually abusing boys, one of whom was me, that is serious enough. But it would have been much more serious if people in power knew of it and covered it up. Do you get my drift?
I get your drift, George. But as one previous caller mentioned, cover-ups are a generational thing, and they have been going on for generations. It's not something that's new, and certainly it shouldn't happen, and certainly it should be uncovered and stopped wherever possible. But these inquiries, yes, people who are alive today, immediate relatives of people who were involved, but it also goes back to one of your previous calls to do with John Nicholson and the pardoning. I mean, how far back does the nation have to go? I mean, do we have to pardon those who were hung, drawn and quartered? There are no parameters, and it leads to this totally endless situation where these inquiries are landed with an almost impossible task.
So, what do you think? What do you think? What's your point of view, John? Should we draw this whole thing to a close?
Well, no, but I think that there certainly has to be, hard as it may seem, government unfortunately has to govern for the nation as a whole, and unfortunately, probably they're probably to get some kind of parameters where they can come up with some kind of logical and sensible conclusions that provide some kind of closure for people. They will have to put parameters on the thing by way of time, whether the people are alive. Whether the people who are being accused have got, we had a recent case, whether it was true or not, of somebody who had dementia being hauled into court to answer for crimes that he probably didn't even understand what he was being hauled into court for. It's certainly perhaps...
Well, you'll forgive me if I'm a little sceptical on that one, John. But thanks for your call. It's an interesting point of view. It's a different point of view to mine, and all the more welcome for that. Let's talk to Anis in Amsterdam about the US elections. You see how our international audience is growing. Anis, welcome.
Yes, George. Thank you for having me on your show. What I would want to ask you, actually speak about, is does it really matter who wins, Trump or Hillary? Well, we assume that it won't be Jill Stein, but it's a global universal system which is based on the idea that history and values of Western and especially American society are equivalent to universal laws, and artificially tries to construct a global society on us.
Well, I think it does matter. You make a good general point that, we're not likely to ever see the likes of Dr. Stein elected as President of the United States, which would change the nature, the character of the United States and indeed the world system. But it does matter a bit. If George W. Bush had not been elected and Al Gore had been elected, I doubt if the Iraq War in the form that it took place would have taken place.
I don't know, because Western values like liberalism, parliamentarism, capitalism, individualism, unlimited technological development, and so forth, these are values, local ones, emerging from the particular development of a single culture, and globalization is trying to impose them onto all of humanity as something that is universal.
Well, of course, Anis, I'm familiar with these arguments, but let me bring it further up to date. I think that Barack Obama has been a gigantic disappointment, and I believe that he has committed many crimes, but I cannot agree that it wouldn't have mattered if John McCain had become the president instead of Barack Obama. Do you get my drift?
Yeah, that's true. We know that John McCain has been locked up under earth for quite a long time.
Exactly so, yes. So I think, whilst it would be wrong to pretend or to claim, as I'm partially guilty of doing in the case of Barack Obama, that any great hope can be placed in this or that US presidential candidate, it would be better if this contest were not between the two cheeks of the same backside, although that's actually too cute an analogy, between these two monsters. I mean real monsters. Hillary Clinton and berserk Donald Trump. Berserk and dangerous. Cold, calculating and dangerous. That's the choice. It's the devil in the deep blue sea.
Yeah, it's true what you're saying, but for example, let's take Amnesty International, whom are made to protect human rights worldwide. So also the human rights that are involved in wars of George W. Bush and the human rights of people that have been tortured under the Obama administration. But George, you know that this is not the case. You spoke last time, like a few weeks ago, to Christian Benedict, who showed the real face of Amnesty International. They open their eyes when the Russians do something, but as soon as the West does so, they instantly fall asleep.
Well, of course, familiar with that too, Anis. You're pushing at an open door here. But I still insist that a Labour government is better than a Tory government. A president like Obama is better than a President John McCain. I just wish I could say the same in this contest, but I can't. Although most people in the centre-left milieu, which I, of course, inhabit myself, most of those people believe that Hillary Clinton is better than Donald Trump. I myself cannot bring myself to say that.
No, definitely not. No, I would agree with you on that one.
Okay, Anis, thanks for the call.
We'll see
in Amsterdam. Yes, we'll see very soon what happens. Now, Ray from London says, George, you have an opinion on John Kerry. To me, he's the most articulate, intelligent of all the Democrats. Why is he not in Hillary's place? Is there something I don't know about him? Well, he did actually stand for president and got thoroughly beaten by that tower of wisdom and charisma, George W. Bush. So he's not got a great track record on winning elections. So I'm not sure I agree with you anyway that he's articulate or intelligent, although once upon a time he may have been. Indeed, I was talking to my political secretary, Tim, on the way in here this evening. It's one of the marks of this period, it's one of the characterizations of this period, that there are actually no rising political individuals or forces in the United States at all. Bernie Sanders' sun has now set. He made, I think, a very grave error of judgment in backing Hillary Clinton. He would have been better either staying out of it to see what happened or to indeed launch an independent candidature himself. After all, he was robbed, he was cheated out of the Democratic Party's nomination. In any case, he's older than all of them. So his sun has set, and there is no one else in the Democratic Party of whom I am aware, I would love to be corrected, who you could say, well, in 4 years, in 8 years, this person, him or her, will be a force to be reckoned with. The Republican Party, to me, looks as if it is now historically defunct. It played the role in my lifetime of being the Conservative Party, of being the free market capitalist party, but with some degree of sophistication. And when I look at the decline, and I never thought I'd find myself using these words, the decline from Richard Nixon to Donald Trump, it is a staggering decline. Nixon was a criminal in many ways, not just the way that led to his resignation as president, but he was a highly sophisticated, extremely intelligent, very well educated theorist, a man who had a theory about how America should be run. Donald Trump is an idiot. He's a fool, a buffoon, and a dangerous buffoon at that. Now, a Republican Party that chooses Donald Trump is no longer fit for purpose, in my view. And what's going to happen next? You see, I've tried to discuss this with our American guests. Maybe we'll get a chance in the third hour with the British expert that we have on. What happens next? I mean, I'm assuming that Clinton is going to win this election, probably by 7, 8, 9 points, and therefore almost a landslide. But there'll still be 25, 30, 35 million people will vote for Donald Trump and who will consider Clinton an illegitimate president from the very first day, will believe that the election was stolen from Trump. What will Trump do next? Will he retire to run his casinos into the ground, according to the accounts anyway? Or will he try to stay in politics? Will he inherit the remains of the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party? Will sane members of the Republican Party break away from their current moorings and seek to establish some kind of new political force? Will the Greens ever break through? Will people farther to the left than the Democratic Party ever begin to make it onto the US political scene? None of these things is impossible. All of them might be considered necessary. I certainly think so. I don't think the Democratic Party is any better, in any better shape. A party that chooses Hillary Clinton is as dysfunctional, almost, as a party that chooses Donald Trump as its presidential candidate. The Greens have come up with the best candidate of them all, but undoubtedly she's languishing in the opinion polls, blocked out of the debates, and so on. The Tea Party, and people like it, the religious right in the US, though how religious they are is very difficult to understand. If they can embrace someone like Donald Trump, it doesn't sound very like religion to me. Maybe it's organised hypocrisy that is their religion. The Reverend Jimmy Swaggart skimming the collection plates to pay for the hookers and the crystal meth behind the altar. Maybe that's the kind of religious right we have in the United States. But these people have ruined the Republican Party. It's certainly no longer the party of honest Abe Lincoln. How could anyone imagine that it was? So, Ray, I've answered your point at some length. Davenport Red says, Dr. Jill Stein, pity she's got no chance of winning because of the US system. Stephen O'Regan says, on US elections they are not equally, both bad but equally bad. Well, I have at length given you my view on that. Now, I hadn't actually intended to deal with this subject tonight, but an earlier tweet or text raised the issue of the Alan Turing law, which was attempted in Parliament today by the SNP Member of Parliament, John Nicholson, a former broadcaster, himself a gay man, to try to extend the pardon that was given to Alan Turing to others who were convicted of things which were crimes at the time, but which are no longer crimes, and of which, as a nation, we may well be ashamed that they ever were crimes. One such person is George Montagu, a Brighton man, who I'll introduce in a minute. George Montagu was convicted in 1974 of gross indecency, as it was called, with a man. He says he wants an apology, not a pardon. And he goes on to say, to accept a pardon means you accept that you were guilty. I was not guilty of anything. I was only guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what he told the BBC. I think it was wrong, he says, to give Alan Turing, one of the heroes of my life, he says, a pardon. What was he guilty of? He was guilty of the same as what they call me guilty of, being born only able to fall in love with another man. He added, if I get an apology, I will not need a pardon. He added that there never should have been an offence of gross indecency. It didn't apply, he says, to heterosexuals. Heterosexuals could do what they liked in the doorways, in passageways, in the back of their car. It only applied to gay men, and that's not right, surely. Now, I'm glad to say George is on the line and can help us with this issue. George Montagu in Brighton, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
No,
I'm honoured.
The pleasure is mine. It was attempted today. I absolutely understand the point that you are making. But nonetheless, John Nicholson's effort today was a noble enough and brave enough effort, don't you think?
I've listened to it all with pride.
And were you surprised at the way government members of Parliament talked it out?
Not really. I'm very encouraged. It's going very well.
How do you mean you were encouraged?
Well, I'm sure it's going to go through.
Oh, no, I don't think it will. I think it's now been talked out. It will be a while before it can come back. But, of course, where there's life...
It's going to take a while.
Where there's life, there's
in
hope.
Westminster, these things always do, don't they?
Indeed. Nothing worth having comes easily. So you take the view that pardoning Alan Turing, one of the great men of British history, one of the greatest men of the 20th century, was fundamentally wrong because it implies that he had something to be guilty of.
Exactly.
Tell us why.
He wasn't guilty of anything, only the same as me. And it was an insult. Go back to Oscar Wilde. That's where we want to go back far enough to Oscar Wilde.
100 years this week?
Yes, only just over 100 years ago, and he was put under gross indecency. What a wonderful man he was. Don't you think he deserves a posthumous apology?
Well, for me, Oscar Wilde is one of the greatest men that ever lived, certainly one of the greatest men that ever spoke our language and wrote our language. I always say, when I'm speaking in the Oxford Union, that no greater man trod those boards than Oscar Wilde. He was treated abominably as gay men, and I suppose women too, though there were fewer of those because the state wished to pretend that gay women didn't exist. Indeed, Queen Victoria said that they couldn't possibly exist. But gay men, like Oscar Wilde, like Alan Turing, and many thousands, maybe tens of thousands of others, were treated abominably. But I do think the state issuing a pardon...
I understand completely. You take a heterosexual man, only 50 years ago, most heterosexual men cannot possibly get it round their heads that it's nothing but disgusting and terrible. They don't understand it. They really can't. Now, young gays have never had it so good. I've never had it so good as today. People now understand. And what has helped a great deal, which I must mention, you mentioned transgender. A few years ago, the transgender, all they did was keep themselves to themselves and commit suicide. Now they're coming out. And that is wonderful. They didn't ask to be the way they are, and neither did I.
Well, I thought the most powerful of the points you made on the BBC was that straight people, of which I'm one,
I don't like that word.
Were able to...
I hate that word. Please don't use that word.
You don't...
If you use that word, it means I'm bent. Gay or not gay, or nothing at all.
No, if you'll forgive me, I'll define myself as straight, and I'll say this, that straight people, or as you would put it, non-gay people, are able to behave exactly as they please and always have been. Able to hold hands in the street, able to kiss in the street, able, within reason, to go up an alleyway in a tenement entrance or in the back seat of a car and so on. Up to a point, they were left entirely alone.
Probably watched by the police with enjoyment.
Sorry?
Probably watched by the police with enjoyment.
Oh. Very good point. Maybe we shouldn't go further down this alleyway. But George Montague, finally, are you really saying that it would be better if Parliament didn't pass this law, because to do so would be to accept... let me preface this, because I had this dilemma once as a Member of Parliament. I was fighting for the equalisation of the age of consent to 16. And the government proposed that we should reduce the age of consent for gay people from 21 to 18. I voted for 16 and against 18.
entirely. I've worked with young people in the Scout Association for many, many years. The trouble is, you get a 16-year-old boy that is 18 months, 2 years sometimes, younger than his years. Same as a 16-year-old boy can be a couple of years older. Therefore, 16 or even 18, in my view, is too young.
So you think the age of consent should be what, 21?
It should still be 21 before any male is touched by anyone. Another male.
Wow,
that's what I think.
My goodness,
fashion, I suppose.
You are a cornucopia of contradictions, but I like you. George Montague in Brighton, thank you very much for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Well, I hadn't intended discussing this issue at all. I certainly hadn't anticipated conversing with George Montague, and still less did I anticipate some of the arguments that he would make. Nor did I, says Edward, my producer, preempting a discussion after the show, which might otherwise have happened. This is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows, and I'm here every Friday night. In the third hour, we're going to talk politics, US style, but who knows what else we'll be discussing. We don't seem to have any kind of answer to the mystery of what happened at the city airport this evening. Maybe we'll get something in the last hour, and we can revisit some of the other issues that we have been talking about. I don't rule it out. Najam Sahibzada says karma is hitting the US after the quote-unquote democracy they installed in weaker countries. And Lynn Benyon says the choice is Trump for peace or Clinton for World War III. I hope the people choose peace. God save us. Clinton Mason says there will be civil war if Trump loses the election, I think. Well, I hope not, but of course there are a lot of weapons in the US, so civil war can never be entirely ruled out. Well, where do you stand on Clinton or Trump? As my big Australian pal Sean Caden just pointed out, it's like asking whether you like the Boston Strangler or Jack the Ripper better. I say, a plague on both their houses. Down with them all. I need this last hour to go swiftly because as soon as it's over, I have to get behind the wheel and drive 500 miles to Scotland for a funeral. And then I have to catch the 1 p.m. flight back to London in the afternoon because I've got to present 2 television shows in North London. And they say I'm getting old. I would walk 500 miles. That's one of my very favourite songs, I must tell you. Lord Lucky says Jill Stein is a diamond in the firmament. I agree. I can't give your full name out, Lord Lucky. I hope you understand. A few years ago, many Americans were taking to the hills blaming Washington. After this year's rubber stamping, I suspect you have seen nothing yet. That's from Kevin. And I suspect, too, that is correct. That perhaps this election, more than any other, will lead to a widespread delegitimization, demonization, and alienation from the outcome. And given the vociferous nature of the United States, the gigantic presence of guns, a density of which is staggering, 33,000 people were killed by firearms in the United States in the last 12 months, either by murder, suicide, or accident. 33,000 dead, and many, many more wounded, of course. Given the presence of such levels of alienation, with this one laid on top, it might just actually be the trigger for serious trouble in the United States. That's my uneducated, untutored view. Let's hear from Professor Inderjeet Parmar, who I promise you is a great guest and a great expert. Professor, welcome to the show.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good, and the better for talking to you. Tell me what you think how you think the election stands this evening.
Well, I mean, it's quite clear that after the three debates, and in the general drift of things since sort of late September, that Hillary Clinton has pulled away a little bit, and particularly in those sort of key 13 states which are going to pretty much decide the election. So those swing states, I think, out of the 13, probably 12, Hillary Clinton's in the lead. So, and I think she's made some inroads into what were often considered to be very solid Republican states as well, like Utah. So I think Hillary Clinton appears to be heading to the White House at the moment. But we know how volatile things have been up to now.
It would be defined as a landslide if she won by 10 points, I think. Are we looking at that kind of a level of victory, do you think, Professor?
I don't think so, no. I think in terms of the national polls, it's probably going to be, 53-47 or something along those lines if they were just head-to-head. But I would think that probably Hillary will get around 44 to 45, and possibly Trump will be around 40 or 41 or thereabouts. So it doesn't look huge in the national context, but when you translate that into the individual states, that actually will probably be a landslide or a very large margin of victory in electoral college votes.
And what do you think about the Senate race? Are the coattails of Clinton long enough to carry many new Democratic senators into power? And is the lead weight of Donald Trump heavy enough to sink some of the big Republicans?
Yes, I think so. I think that's been on the cards for quite some time. And I suspect that the recent split between Trump and the party leadership, particularly since that videotape came out of him, saying pretty vile things about women and what he has done or tried to do before. So I think that has actually widened the rift. And I think the Senate, I think it's only a question of 4 seats changing hands. And I think the Democrats seem quite confident that they'll carry that. What was less certain, much less certain, it still remains uncertain, was the House of Representatives, all of which is going to be stand for election on the 8th of November, 435 seats. And that, I think the Democrats were going to get kind of gains there of between 15 and 20 or thereabouts. But it looks like they may well get a lot more as a result of what's been going on since that tape came out.
Let me, as it were, digress onto that tape.
Yeah.
It was indeed a display of vile, misogynistic, almost violent, maybe actually violent, hatred and contempt for women. Of that there is no doubt. But Bill Clinton has, for decades, been responsible for not vile rhetoric, but actions. How have the public reacted in the way that they have in that context, in your view?
Well, I suppose, obviously Bill Clinton's history is reasonably well known, and my main response to that, Mr. Galloway, is that Hillary Clinton is not responsible for what her husband has been doing. No,
although she supported him throughout and trashed. She trashed several of his victims.
Yes. Well, that appears to be the case also. And I guess the main thing was that in 1992, when Bill Clinton first won his first term, there was actually a massive split in the Republican vote because Ross Perot, the billionaire Texan, ran as an independent third-party candidate and actually took, something like 17 or 18 million votes.
He did, yeah.
Away from George H.
I don't know if you still remember. I don't have the figures, but
yeah.
If he hadn't run, might Clinton have lost?
I think he would have in 1992, definitely. He would have in 1992. But in 1996, when he ran for the second term, at that time the American economy was roaring away. General living standards and income levels were going up. African Americans suffered in certain ways, but they actually gained a lot in terms of actual relative gains in income in that 1990s period. And so his victory was therefore made much more certain as a result of that. But in 1992, I think he would definitely have lost. And I don't think the Republican right ever really forgave him for winning in 92. But in the end, it was the fact there was an anti-George H.W. Bush candidate in Ross Perot who really swung it. I think he took something like 18 or 19 million votes.
Now, almost as interesting as who's going to win the election, Professor, is what's going to happen after it. Yeah. Trump gave a hint in the debate this week when he said that he could not guarantee that he would accept the result. And even if he did, which I actually suspect he will, many millions of people in the United States will not. And we are all the time discovering just how deep the levels of alienation between communities, problems of race, between the people and the police and so on. And, of course, the density of possession of weapons in the US. Is it conceivable that some much more serious problems could develop in the United States after the election?
I think clearly it is a possibility because the level of anger and alienation, as you say, has actually magnified a great deal. And I think you can tell about the depth of it because it's within the Democratic Party's environs as well as in the Republican Party's environs that you've got this. So you've got a collapsing center in American politics, but you've got much, much greater levels of protest against the establishment, of both on the sort of relative left and on the hard right. And of course, as you say, gun ownership is very high. And I don't think this alienation is going to go away, and the anger levels aren't going to go away. If you recall back in 2012, it was already quite clear that the distance between the main political parties and their candidates had already grown very, very high, and that levels of inequality, particularly as a result of the 2008-2009 financial crisis, that had caused a great deal of disconnect between the electorate and the two main political parties. I think by 2016 the situation has got even worse, particularly as people are seeing more and more inequality in the greater level of profitability of the big banks and the levels of excess, if you like, which had occurred previously, which had caused the 2008 crash as well. And so I think people are suffering a great deal.
And the deindustrialization of the US through the ultra-free trade mantras adopted by, in particular, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton before her, the American equivalent of TTIP, the NAFTA and so on. I remember very well sitting in a hotel in the Midwest at breakfast time, and a very large table of, I would have characterized them as blue-collar, white senior citizens were also taking breakfast. And I listened to their conversation. And the levels of anger shook me. The levels of racism against Obama shook me. And the sense in which this large group of people, I'm talking 20, 30 people, how they felt that the political class had nothing at all to do with them. And that was, 5 or 6 years ago.
Correct, yes.
It's gotten worse since, hasn't it?
It has got worse. There's a very interesting talk by Robert Reich, who was Labour Secretary under Bill Clinton in the 1990s, and he's a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. When he did his book tour of the Midwest last year, he asked his publisher to send him into sort of bookshops in areas of the U.S. where normally a Democrat wouldn't be sent, a liberal wouldn't be sent. And he said what he learned there was that the vitriol against the establishment, against the Republican Party's establishment, as well as the establishment in general, was very, very deep, and that there was a great deal in common between the sort of stances that Robert Reich was taking with what a lot of deeply Republican individuals were taking as well. And I think, so therein lies, I think, an interesting development, which is that a lot of the Republican people who are supporting the Republican right are actually possible converts to the cause that Bernie Sanders actually espoused as well.
As if he'd been the candidate, he could potentially have won these people.
I think, well, before the convention back in August, July, when there were head-to-head polls, right for several months before that, head-to-head polls which put Bernie Sanders against Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders was defeating Donald Trump by 10 points plus.
Yes. I recall that very well. Finally, because I've kept you enough on a Friday night, there is a comparator here, isn't there, with the Brexit debate and result in Britain, where similarly a very substantial section of blue-collar working-class people in post-industrial Britain who are so enraged at the political class and the so-called experts that they won't listen to a word that comes out of their mouths. Is this a false comparison, or am I right?
I don't think it's a false comparison at all. I think actually there are very similar processes, and the Brexit vote, as you say, if you look at places like Sunderland and other parts of post-industrial Britain, a lot of those people have been left behind, not just in the post-2008 phase, but a lot of them are the products of the Thatcher period, when there was a sort of massive attack on manufacturing, if you like, and the trade union movement and so on. A similar thing happened in the 1970s and 1980s in the United States. So what you've got are the kind of communities of people who effectively have been left behind for many, many decades, and in effect, the Brexit or the EU referendum gave them a chance to say something. They asked them a straight question, and it was quite clear where the establishment effectively stood on that question. And I think they just wanted to basically make a very, very large protest. If you like, it was a rejectionist vote rather than for anything necessarily very positive. And I think in some respects, people have treated the primaries in the United States in the same kind of way, that they are willing to back somebody with whom they may not actually agree on a large number of issues. And in fact, most polls show that the majority of people who say they're going to vote for Donald Trump do not even believe that he's going to make a good president. But they are willing to basically back somebody who is sticking up two fingers, if you like, to the establishment. And don't really care what the outcome might be, even though they're probably the most likely group to suffer the consequences of a possible Trump presidency.
Professor Palmer, you're a very wise man and a great talker. Thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows this evening. Now, Ty says, by email I think, this US election is so bad, I dread to think what the election in 4 years or 8 years is going to be like. DM says, the question you need to ask yourself is who is more dangerous and likely to start more wars. Well, I do ask myself that, and I cannot understand why people, and I'm inferring something, DM, forgive me if I'm wrong, I cannot understand those who argue that Trump is less dangerous, less likely to start more wars. I think that Donald Trump doesn't know what he's going to do or say 60 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, before he says it, or does it. So the idea that just because Clinton has an overtly more hawkish prospectus, that means that Trump, in power, with 8,000 thermonuclear warheads at the end of his bedside in a nuclear football, is somehow a safer pair of hands, is profoundly misjudged. That's my view, DM, and there's more where that came from. A major incident occurred in London today. Who are you going to call? I'm going to call Toby Gillis.
Thank you very much.
Tell us what's happened.
It's an honour to be here. We've actually got a bit of an update on this as well, so I'll give you that after I've explained what happened. So the way this worked was that just after 4 o'clock this afternoon, London City Airport was evacuated. 500 people had to leave the terminal when the emergency services moved in to investigate after people randomly, it seemed, started coughing. 27 had to be treated for breathing difficulties. And it turned out there was a suspected chemical leak. That was what was reported to the emergency services. Experts swept the site. They didn't find any unusually high readings, but the update is that they found what's believed to be a CS gas spray. So that's what they seem to think it was. The airport has now been cleared, declared safe, and is reopened.
And was this a police issue, CS gas?
Well, it was the fire brigade that came in. We haven't got too much more detail on whether that's a police issued CS gas or whether it's come from another source. That's where we're at the moment. So we wait to find out.
And no one arrested.
Nobody arrested so far.
Toby, you're going to stay on this story, aren't you?
Of course.
Over the next hour, so I have no doubt you'll bring that to our attention.
Anything that comes up, I'll bring it in.
Fantastic. Toby, thanks. I'm glad you were here. We needed your gravitas to deliver the update. I could have done it, but it's far better coming from you. Billy says Trump is willing to talk to Putin, which can only be a good thing, right? Yeah, until he changes his mind. Self-determination on Trump. No one is interrogating the failure of this shamocracy with any outrage or seriousness. Well, I think I am. Angela McCabe emails, George, why did the Russians not ask our permission to enter our waters? I find this a hostile act. Do you think we will be at World War III? Well, they're not our waters. They are international waters, open to international shipping, and they were on their way to the Mediterranean, where they will be joining the war against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. We, on the other hand, without any legal authorization of any kind, neither from the government of Syria nor the United Nations, are openly operating on and over Syria, dropping very deadly ordnance. So if you want to talk about permission, let's talk about the total lack of permission for our actions in Syria and our support for the international terror gangs there over these last 5 years. But it's too late at night and we're not dealing with this subject tonight, so I'll restrict my views to that, because I want to hear from Mark in Paris, just to show the international reach of the mother of all talk shows. Mark, you want to talk about Trump? Tell me.
How you doing, Georgie boy?
Great. Nice to hear from you, sir.
It's a great honour to finally hear your... Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
I feel like I'm stepping in the ring with Muhammad Ali, a lamb to the slaughter, but I've forgotten what I was going to say now. But yeah, I was going to talk to you about Mr. Donald Trump.
Go ahead.
And whether, this big opera about whether he should be president or not, and whether he's the great evil that we all say is justified. I don't think it is. I think he should be treated with the
same lack of respect as Clinton. That's how I would put it.
Yeah. I mean, I think people sort of take him too much for granted. He is a businessman. He's kicked a few doors down to get where he is. Okay, he's a businessman. He designs hotels. He designs golf courses. Why should he be the next president of the United States? Hold the keys of power to the to the leader of the free world. And I think, well, what's wrong with that? He's going to be a different perspective, hold a different angle on stuff that the other families, dynasties that have taken power in America, the Bushes, going back even further, never have done. So I think we should not poo-poo George Bush. I think we should hold Donald Trump with a bit of respect that he deserves.
Well, I don't think he deserves any respect at all. And let me just comment on one or two of the points that you made. First of all, he's a very bad businessman. That much is now clear. That's why he didn't want to reveal the financial data that ought to be a common occurrence in anybody running for a major party for presidency of the United States. He posted 18 years ago, a loss of $1 billion, $1 billion, meaning that he didn't have to pay tax for the next 18 years, and he hasn't. He has been bankrupt multiple times. He's bankrupted multiple businesses. He's not remotely as rich as he claims he is. And in fact, if he'd left the $200 million that his father left him in the bank and never invested a penny, never opened a single business, he'd be much richer today than he actually is. Thirdly, I don't believe either he or Hillary Clinton are worthy of any respect. I don't believe that either of them is less or more evil than the other. In fact, if I was forced to do so, I would say that Hillary Clinton has already demonstrated just how evil she is. We can only infer how evil Donald Trump would be. I think it is a terrifying indictment on the United States that this election is being fought between two such monsters. Fourthly, I don't believe there's a quote-unquote free world, and I don't believe America or its president are the leader of it. They're not my leader. They don't speak for me. I don't believe in what they believe in. I will oppose root and branch everything either of them does. I'm perfectly sure of that. But apart from that, Mark, I agree. It was a good call.
Yeah, but I mean, don't you think? I mean, you know, you weren't born with a crystal ball. I wasn't born with a crystal ball. Don't we need somebody like George Bush to take on the likes of, because the Russians, you know, they're the greatest chess players in the world. Don't we need someone who's kicked some doors down? Who, you know, there is an escalation now that might lead to World War III. It's that these ships are sighing on the coast of Dover. Don't we need someone like George Bush? Beg your pardon, Donald Trump, to embrace Vladimir Putin?
But I just don't. I don't believe that that's. I just don't believe that that's what he will do. It might be what he says he will do, but he says all kinds of things. And the only doors he's kicked down, he kicked them down so he could grab the genitals of unsuspecting, often terrified women. He is a monster.
Yeah,
he's a monster.
Yeah, come on. I mean, you know, that's all. You know, a bit of a smear campaign from the
what do you mean?
Camp, isn't it?
He's not denying. He's not denying.
I mean, you haven't got crystal clear evidence of that.
I've got the videotape. I've got the videotape, as you do.
Maybe, you know, we need somebody who's going to be a bit of an outsider, who's going to take on.
He reduces 50%. Mark,
be a bit of a wild card. He's going to take on the powers of the world and not be a career politician. And he's going to, you know, like he did in Aberdeen when he made that golf course. Alex Salmond, you know, they were all against him.
They were against him because he was despoiling the Scottish coastline, and moreover, he lied about how much money he was investing in it. The man is a total charlatan. Now, none of that is to say that his opponent is anything better. If forced, as I said, I'd say that she's already proved that she's worse. But don't ask me to support a man who thinks of 50% of the population of the world as merely pussy. That he can, because of his celebrity, physically assault.
George, what choice have we got, mate? What choice have we got? If you go back in history, in the American presidential history, we've had George W., we've had George W. Sr., George Sr., we've gone back to Carter and all the rest of it. They've all been career politicians.
Jimmy Carter wasn't a career politician.
They were all all part of it, like you say, two cheeks of the same backside.
No, you shouldn't rope Carter in with that. If you stick to the Bushes and the Clintons, I'm with you. Mark, I've got to go because I've got to take a break. But thanks very much for your call from Paris. Matthew in Wigan is up next. Mohammed says, one is dangerous, the other dumb. I pity Americans and, by extension, the rest of the world. You and me both, Mohammed. Let's hear from Matthew in Wigan. Go ahead, Matthew.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
First of all, I just wanted to quick point that I pretty much agree with everything you said when you was kind of replying to the last caller then. But as far as the American elections go, I think whether it's the American election or our elections, I think that our democracies, they need to take a long look at themselves.
Yeah, it's a shamocracy, as someone just said.
When the voters, public's getting in the voting booth and it's practically 2-3 choices, and then you combine with that the crony capitalism, lobbying, special interest groups, the general effect of finance on the whole thing, the restrictions that puts into normal everyday people getting into politics. I just think it's pretty depressing, really. And like you say, it's just a sham. And the worrying thing, George, is I don't really see any real urge a change. A comment you made before. I don't see anyone coming along, especially in America, to like rejuvenate it or energize it again. You know what I mean? I just think it's like I say. I think we like to think of ourselves as some sort of pinnacle of democracy. But I think we're anything but at the minute, and the American situation just exemplifies that. Clarifies that better than ever.
Perfectly put, Matthew. It's a shamocracy. It's an organised hypocrisy. The only thing we can do is stop talking about, quote unquote, the free world, unquote, and America as its leader. It isn't a free world. And America isn't its leader. I will never accept America as my leader. It's about time we started standing a bit taller ourselves. And the other European countries, Latin American countries, African, Asian countries started standing taller too. And the reason that they hate Putin and China so much is that they do stand up. And they do say, you're not my leader. Don't tell me what to do. You're not fit to tell me what to do. You're not fit to be my judge. That's the kind of spirit that we want. And that's why you get the hatred that motivated the foolish communication I read out just a few minutes ago. Matthew, thanks for your call. In Wigan, let's go to London and talk to Andy on the same subject. Go ahead, Andy.
All right, George, hopefully we'll have a less heated conversation this time.
Okay.
You're with me, George. Anyways, George, I think Hillary Clinton is a good candidate. I think there's several reasons why. The Supreme Court is obviously one key reason why someone like you, if you were a United States citizen, should vote for Hillary Clinton if you were living in a swing state. Secondly, it's to do with the taxes. If a Republican lowered the taxes to 20 or 15%, I'm talking about the top rate of tax, that would almost end progressive politics. That would have such a detrimental effect on people. I just don't see. Thirdly, and finally, actually, this is the most important point. Donald Trump has no grasp of policy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's been made clear on several occasions when he's been asked in interviews his specific plans or his specific policies on abortion, on Aleppo, on several other issues. He doesn't know what he's talking about. There's only one choice in this election.
Well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and that's dangerous. But is it less dangerous that somebody who does know what she's talking about has as her intentions a course of action that could bring the world to war? And
what do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, her idea of confronting Russia in Syria and elsewhere by military confrontation is much more dangerous than Trump not knowing what he's talking about. Secondly, the idea, Andy, that she represents anything remotely called progressive is belied by the fact that every Wall Street huckster has thrown millions, tens of millions of dollars into her campaign pot. She is a creature of Wall Street whose profession is to avoid taxation of all kinds. The idea that Hillary Clinton represents anything that could remotely be described as progressive is completely wrong.
George, I completely disagree with you. Actually, let me take your last point first, and I'll talk about the foreign policy, Syria and Russia. With respect to the Wall Street donations, you know Barack Obama received the highest amount of fundraising from Wall Street a candidate has ever fundraised. And this is especially important because he was a Democratic president, and in my opinion, he has been the best president of the last 30 years. And I think it shows that with his Dodd-Frank legislation that he passed through and the Obamacare that he pushed through despite fervent opposition from the Republicans, he's made several progressive steps. And part of the reason he's so disliked is because you have a lot of these media, Fox News and, Hannity and Bill O'Reilly pouring out hatred of Barack Obama to a lot of these Midwestern states. And then you have people who just seem to blame him when clearly he's taken steps to make the lives of working people better. And if he had a Senate and a House that was majority Democrat, he would have taken even more steps. With respect to Syria, I am a little bit skeptical about Hillary Clinton's hawkish tendencies, but what we need to do, or what the progressives need to do in the United States, is to put pressure on her to push back against her natural hawkish tendencies. That's the best way you can prevent any further hawkish actions occurring. But I do disagree with you. I think what the Russians have been doing is illegal, it's criminal activity, and it's quite frankly disgraceful what they've been doing in Aleppo, deliberately targeting the Syrian opposition in eastern Aleppo, the cluster bombs and the amount of civilians they've killed. I just completely disagree with you. I think there needs to be a firm hand from the Americans. They need to say, I don't know why you're not going after ISIS in the same manner that you're going after the Syrian opposition.
Listen, that's such a cornucopia of CRAP. I just don't have time to get to grips with it all. You don't have to look in the crystal ball. Hillary Clinton voted for, proselytized for, was a champion of the killing of 1 million people in Iraq. You don't need a crystal ball for that. You just need to read the book. Don't talk to me about Russian action in Aleppo when Hillary Clinton helped to destroy Iraq and bring about the rise of the very ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq that they are now claiming to be against. You have applied a standard to warfare in Aleppo that I very much doubt that you ever did in relation to US and British bombardment of Iraq. Now let's move to Libya. Hillary Clinton was the driver of the total destruction of Libya, which has left Libya not just a failed...
Nicolas Sarkozy was, actually.
No, Hillary Clinton pushed Obama.
It was Nicolas Sarkozy who was intent on Libyan action.
Sarkozy and Cameron were, but they needed to get the Americans involved. Obama was reluctant to be involved. Hillary Clinton said, we came, we saw, he died, big laugh. Well, nobody's laughing now at what happened in Libya, where there's a competition between 4 different factions of Islamist extremists. At one end of the spectrum being ISIS and Al-Qaeda. No, I can't let you get in because it's 9:42. I'm answering the points that you made. Now, you are a plausible caller, but you reveal yourself in the comments that you made about Russia and Syria to be an apologist for the Clinton take on the world. Now it's your turn.
I would say I'm a pragmatist. I would say I'm a Democrat. You made several points about Libya. The Libyan action, well, you were asked this in the young people's question time. What would you have done if you were in government and you can see that the dictator's troops were heading towards Benghazi?
The dictator had no troops. Look, this is bankrupted by our own Foreign Affairs Select Committee. It's absolutely...
It was exaggerated, yes. I do understand.
It was exaggerated, you call it.
But there was still, nonetheless, there was a threat.
You call it exaggerated. I call it black propaganda, war propaganda, that you fell for and I didn't. And the Libyan people, the people in the region, and the people in the world and afloat on the waters are paying for. So be gone with you. The Proclaimers, 500 miles, playing because I'm about to drive with my pal James 500 miles overnight and then fly 500 miles back again at midday. Well, now, Damien is in Brighton. I've got 4 callers, so I'm going to have to rattle through them. Damien, welcome.
Good evening, George.
Evening.
George, regarding the American election, I think America faces a dilemma. I mean, we've obviously got Donald Trump's being elected on the Republican side, a fairly unacceptable candidate to anybody. Hillary Clinton has been polling terrible numbers for the last year. I think both of these candidates reflect a sense of disquiet with American citizens. And I think that the reality is that America's on track to lose its status as the world's #1 superpower. And the kind of views and what's coming out of this election is a manifestation of that. Now, the reason that America's in decline is because China's on the rise. As I understand it, it's estimated that Chinese GDP will exceed America's within the next 5 to 10 years. And on a more global scale, by 2016, the economies of the developing world are going to outweigh the economies of the developed world for the first time since the Industrial Revolution. So there's some massive global changes going on here. Now, the relative gains that China's made against the United States has led to a policy which Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, announced in 2011, which was a pivot to the east. So I think my point is this, George. The dilemma for the US is that it currently spends 54% of its discretionary budget on the military, and that's a total budget of $1.1 trillion. Now, that's been wasted. Trillions of dollars have been wasted on wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, all around the globe. And so I think we've had America wasting trillions of dollars. We've had China, which has been investing heavily in its economy and achieving exceptional growth levels. So I think the bottom line is that, is America under Hillary Clinton going to continue on that path, or is she going to take the advice of Bernie Sanders and apply a model which we need in this country and America needs, which is to invest in the country I mean, the only way we're going to succeed in the modern world, George, this country and America, is to have a healthy, well-educated, highly skilled and well-paid workforce.
Absolutely correct, Damien. I agree with every word that you said, except for this. China's economy is already bigger than the economy of the United States. Colin is in Oldbury. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Colin.
It's been 10 years, George, since I spoke to you.
My goodness. I don't recall it.
George.
Let's not reprise it because of the hour. Tell me what you'd like to say about the US election.
Right, okay. Well, all those people I've heard that have been saying Trump's going to make things better, go on to the internet, look at the anniversary dinner they had last night, and you'll see them both chatting, laughing, talking to each other like they're the best of buddies.
They're two cheeks of the same backside,
exactly,
Colin.
Like you said, and people need to just go on the internet and look at the footage of them two sitting at the dinner together. And you'll see they're of the same place, they're of the same group. Nothing's going to change. The plan is already there. It's going to be played out.
She was at his wedding, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
He donated money to her to stand for the Senate in New York.
Think of it like they're actually best of friends having banter on stage when they're actually slagging each other off in front of the cameras. It's banter. That's why she's laughing and stuff.
Fantastic. Great call, Colin. Great call. Don't wait 10 years to call me again. Peter is in Wigan. Let's hear from him.
Yeah, hi, George.
Go ahead, Peter.
I don't want to repeat some of the stuff you said earlier, but I just want to remind people of Hillary Clinton's record over supporting the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and especially Libya, and now Syria. You mentioned earlier that she said, we came, we saw, he died. And then she went into a hysterical laugh. The woman is a psychopath. And now, what I'm afraid of, she's threatened that she wants to shoot down Russian planes in Syria. Russia is the only country that has been invited into Syria by the legitimate government. The UK and America and Denmark, which I'm ashamed of because my father was Danish, bombed and killed 60 Syrian government soldiers. Imagine if we did that, or if Syria did that to American soldiers on American soil, there would be an international outcry. But there's nothing. It's as though we can go into Syria and bomb and do whatever we want to the people there. And we only hear one side of it. And now these same people, Hillary Clinton and all their crew, they're trying to close down Russian television. And they're using the NatWest Bank and the RBS, which are 70% owned by the British government. It's an absolute disgrace. The American people should wake up and see what they've got. And by the way, I don't support Trump, of course. He's an absolute lunatic as well.
Well said, Peter. Great call from Wigan. Simon's in London. Probably the last call we've got time for, though there are many lined up. Simon, welcome.
Hello there, George.
Hi.
I wanted to talk about the madness that is about to take place once Hillary Clinton takes her designated role as the President of America. Practically, they've set on course the steps for World War III, and I don't think anybody can stop it at this point. The reason being, both Clinton and Trump are nothing but puppets of the American deep state, and there hasn't been an independent president of America since JFK, and we all know how that ended up. That was a stark warning to anybody who would come in and threaten what they have planned. And as it appears, only Putin over the past 15 years has been strong enough and capable enough with his sophisticated air defense systems and rockets to stand up to the bullies that are the NATO countries.
Well, he's playing chess and the rest of them are playing drafts, yeah?
Absolutely. What needs to happen now is to rescue America and the West. The anti-war progressive people in these nations need to stand up and take a stand. I'm somewhat optimistic by what Bernie Sanders has started, because half of the so-called Democrats are openly hostile to Hillary Clinton.
But who can take Sanders' project on? He's blown it, and he's too old.
Absolutely. This is the thing. We need, I don't personally think it might be a single figure to come and unite everybody, but the people have to come in and say, we have had enough of war. They need to stand up and they need to shame Hillary Clinton. What needs to happen is, from day one, once she gets elected, she needs to face stiff opposition, not just from the armed redneck hillbillies who are supporting Trump, but also from the so-called progressives of America.
Simon, that's just a brilliant call. I do hope to hear from you again. An outstanding call to bring the callers to a close. Simon in London. Peter Jackson has tweeted, Clinton or Trump is a choice between syphilis and gonorrhea. Oh dear, that's a colourful, if odious way of putting it. Andrew Johnson says, if Clinton gets in, the US will have been controlled by two powerfully rich, corrupt families for 30-odd years. That is exactly true. And trust me on this. Remember, you heard it here first. Chelsea Clinton will be entering elected politics in the United States in the next 5 years. It's supposed to be a republic. They fought a revolution to get rid of hereditary rule. And the Bushes, and don't think that Jeb Bush is finished, because he's not. He's positioning himself to be the next Republican candidate. Another Bush against another Clinton. Now, let me try and get through as many as I can. Richard says, someone needs to build a wall around the White House and make Bill Clinton pay for it. Socialist Chopin says, Turkish troops fired missiles into Syrian Kurdish territory. What's your view on Turkey's presence in Syria? Well, that's a complicated matter to deal with in the seconds that I have available. But Turkey is up to no good in Syria and in Iraq, and it should get out of both. Anonymous says, Clinton on Assange. Why can't we just drone the guy? She's talking about murdering him openly. El Tav says there are no rising stars in UK politics either. I'm lifelong Labour, but I look at the landscape today, and if there was an election tomorrow, I'd have no one to vote for. And Andrew says politics as we know it has gone into meltdown. Well, I'm about to drive my 500 miles. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, God willing. I'll still be here. And bring somebody else with you. Because the ratings are everything in the radio game. I need to see my figures climb and climb.